Great. Thanks so much, Lacey. And thank you, everybody, for joining us today. It's really exciting. I hope everybody had a good, relaxing week, at least one day off Thanksgiving last week. So as we begin this event, we acknowledge and honor the original inhabitants of our various regions. A land acknowledgement is a critical step towards working with Native communities to secure meaningful partnership and inclusion in the stewardship and protection of their cultural resources and homelands. Our institutions were founded upon exclusions and erasures of Indigenous peoples. We honor and are grateful for the land we occupy and recognize the ongoing damage of settler colonialism. Let's take a moment to honor these ancestral grounds that we are collectively gathered upon and support the resilience and strength that all Indigenous people have shown worldwide. I am on the traditional territory of the Kumeyaay peoples. I encourage you to name and acknowledge the Native peoples where you are located in the chat box. Excuse me. On behalf of our program committee, I'd like to welcome you all to this ReMuseum program. Recover, reimagine, revive. What does ReMuseum mean to you? Thank you for joining today's virtual conversation to delve deeply into the challenges that the museum field is currently facing and how our field can move forward. Sorry, tickle my throat. In this series, members of our program committee are in dialogue with special guests who have knowledge or experience to help us consider new perspectives. So sorry, I'm not sick. I just inhaled wrong. Let me remind you that CAM has a board-approved code of conduct for participation in our programs. A link was sent to you in the, in the confirmation for this program. But Lacey is also going to paste a link in the chat box for your convenience. CAM is committed to providing a safe, inclusive, and respectful learning and networking experience for everyone. I'd like to introduce our program committee members who will lead today's discussion. That's Kevin McGarry and Kalie Sacco. And with that, I will turn it over to them.
All right, thank you so much. And thank you to you all for being in our session today. My name is Kalie Sacco. I am the Chief of Staff at the Lawrence Hall of Science, which is UC Berkeley's Public Science Center. And I am also a member of the CAM Program Committee. Big thanks to Lacey, Celeste, Tomoko, and everyone at CAM who has helped put together this event and this whole series. I hope that this is not your first time joining the series, and I hope that it won't be the last as well. I'm especially excited though about today's session, which focuses on a topic that is always relevant for the museum field, but is exceptionally critical to address as we reckon with the events of 2020 and look forward towards the future. Little bit of housekeeping. The format of today's discussion will be a moderated panel with plenty of time for Q&A at the end. So in the interim, let's keep our mics muted so that the panel members can speak and utilize the chat function. I have some prepared questions, but I do want to keep it conversational. So as you have questions arise throughout the session, go ahead and pop them in the chat, and then we'll come back to them at the end of the session. With that housekeeping out of the way, I would love for our two panelists to introduce themselves briefly. So Ayanna, take it away.
Okay. Thank you for having me today. I'm really excited about this program. My name is Ayanna Reed, she, her, hers pronouns. I'm the Chief Human Resource Officer at the Oakland Museum of California. Been there, it will be 8 years in February. And I come from a host of other industries, but this has been my favorite industry in my career thus far. So I'm really excited to be a part of this community. Thank you.
Thank you. And Anne, can you go ahead?
Sure. My name's Ann Petersen. I'm the Executive Director of the Santa Barbara Trust for Historic Preservation. We have an operating agreement with California State Parks to operate El Presidio de Santa Barbara State Historic Park in downtown Santa Barbara. And we have a couple of other projects in the county. I've been at the organization for 20 years in various capacities, and I have a background in museum studies, public history, and history of the American West. And so I'm very committed to the organization and this work. I also have a degree in American Ethnic Studies, which has really helped shape, I think, the direction that our organization has been taking about how to interpret our site, and has really served me well in our preliminary DEI work. There's a little bit about me.
Excellent, thank you. So as you can see, we have two kind of very different job titles, two different types of institutions on our panel today. So looking forward to hearing those perspectives. And to kick it off, let's start with kind of a big question about what went into the process of developing your organization's diversity, equity, access, and inclusion plan. Maybe you call it something a little bit different too. Anne, why don't you go ahead and start?
Sure. Well, our plan is hot off the press. The board approved it in September, and we've now made it public, and so it's on our website. The process began several years ago. My organization has been undergoing a lot of change. The site that we operate is the site of the founding, the European founding of Santa Barbara. So it was a Spanish fort that had fallen into great disrepair over the years, and other communities settled on the site. So it's also the site of Japantown and Chinatown, and was a very thriving Mexican neighborhood during the Mexican period. So it's been a site of vast immigration and settlement from diverse cultures. And the primary interpretive theme for the park had been to interpret the Spanish colonial period, which we did almost exclusively for many years. We started to introduce, I think that the Great Recession was a watershed moment for us, where we were forced to, because of changing funding sources, be more responsive to the community. And we started to interpret different parts of the history. And the next watershed moment was the acquisition of Jimmy's Oriental Gardens, a Chinese family-run restaurant that sits within the site of the Presidio, and had been seen as something that may be an expendable resource. But we got it added to the park for its value to interpret Asian American history in California. And when we started sort of thinking about changing our themes, we didn't have all the language that we have now for this topic and all the tools that were available. And I had moved up from being curator to associate director and now executive director. And when I became executive director in 2016, my first goal was to get a strategic plan. We'd never had one. We had all kinds of plans, landscape plans, interpretive plans. We didn't have a strategic plan. So we did a real community-based process that resulted in a new mission statement, value statements, and a plan. And diversity, equity, and inclusion were woven throughout the plan and our value statements. And that was very intentional, because we'd been having to make a lot of arguments with our existing audience about why we were adding more stories and more audiences, more interpretation to what we were doing, and make sure that people understood that this was a process of addition and not subtraction from their favorite program or story. So, I thought a lot and reached out to a lot of colleagues and spent a lot of quality conference time with the American Association of State and Local History that's been very engaged in this work for the last several years. We also joined the International Coalition of Sites of Conscience, another wonderful partner for doing this kind of work. And I decided that, sort of having a policy statement or doing a training session or having a ad hoc committee was not going to get the work done, that we needed to have a plan, and we needed to have the policy statement too, and we needed to do the training too. But we needed to make a real commitment, because what we decided was that this is about organizational change. It's not about a project. And so that took us on a journey that has become very comprehensive, and I feel like we're still very much at the beginning of it. So I'd mentioned this before to the small group, but I'm so flattered to be included with staff from the Oakland Museum, because they are such a model for me. That's kind of where we are in the process. We did 9 months of training with consultants, board and staff, separately and together, to get us on a common page with a common language about what we were talking about and a common commitment. And then created the plan document. It's a 2.5-year plan. We'll do another plan when this one's over. It integrates with our strategic plan. And it's both internal and external. So it involves, work with board recruitment, staff hiring, internal culture, and also our exhibits and programs, and outreach and relationships with the community. So it's pretty comprehensive, and that's sort of our team's next step. There are, I think, 4 members of my team on the call today, including Kevin McGarry, and we all know we have a lot of work to do, and we're excited about it. We're sort of in the process of creating the implementation plan to go along with this, so that we can make sure that we set those milestones and those dates and action items, and hold ourselves accountable.
Great. Thank you. That one thing that really strikes me as you're talking about the development of your plan is you mentioned that the momentum really started in 2008, and then there was a nexus point in 2016, and here we are in 2020 with the plan, as you said, kind of hot off the presses. So definitely it is not a, as you say, not a kind of short-term project. This is something that takes a lot of intention and time and planning. So Ayanna, I'd like to turn it over to you to get your background on the process for developing the Oakland Museum's DEAI plan.
So first, I want to say congratulations to Anne. That is no easy feat. So just so happy for all of you there. And you'd be surprised, the Oakland Museum actually does not have a comprehensive, documented, cohesive plan that we have all agreed upon as an organization that we can also share with the public. Now, what I will say is we have a variety of plans. So different departments over the years, different functions have created plans. And about 18 months ago, we started to consolidate those plans into one. And then we had to take a pause, because what we realized was it was not the way we wanted to develop the plan. It was top down. It was basically designed by the executive team with very little input from the variety of staff members who were doing the work from across the organization. It also was basically capturing what we had done previously. While important to capture and to document, it wasn't a plan of what we were going to do in the future and where we were going as an organization. And we're closing our current strategic plan. And in a couple of years, we'll be designing a new strategic plan. So we wanted to figure out, how do we incorporate this into not only where we are today, but how do we continue to be relevant in the future and tie it to resources and capacity building and our future strategic plan. So that's where we are now. We are working with staff to be more transparent, to be more inclusive, to hear voices at all levels, to be able to work together to create a comprehensive plan. And as you said, Kalie, this takes years. It took years to get us this far, 51 years old as a museum. And we were founded as a museum of the people. So for 51 years, we've had amazing staff and collaborators working on these efforts. And we have new vision and new people and new voices that need to be a part of what the future looks like. And so we don't have a plan, which it may be surprising to a lot of people, because we've been doing this work for a long time, but it's really important for us to have a plan that is inclusive of our current staff and future staff and key stakeholders.
Thank you. Another thing that I heard Ayanna you say, and actually both of you say, is that your institution's efforts in this kind of latest iteration of creating a plan has really been with inclusivity in mind. So Ayanna, you talked about transparency and inclusivity of staff at all levels. And you mentioned the strategic planning process that you went through that's informing this work, drew on community participation. So that kind of strikes me as thinking about what's important for developing these plans at institutions, that kind of keeping inclusivity and transparency in mind, both internally and externally. And I'd love to hear a little bit more about what are some other important factors for organizations to consider when developing these plans? And maybe let's start at the Oakland Museum this time.
Sure. So yeah, again, it's about those voices. So whether it's our board, who, you know, the board leadership really needs to be a part of any long-term plan. It's our staff, it's our volunteers, our partners and collaborators, our contractors who we're working with. It's the community, it's the local community and our members and our visitors. You know, they all have a stake in what we're doing. We also are in the city of Oakland, so the city has a stake in what we do, and they own our collection in our building. And so it's really important that all of the people are a part of the process. Also, really being conscious about the inputs and the capacity and the time that it takes, because you don't want to create a plan that you can't actualize. So what are the resources that are there, and how do you reprioritize those resources to make this important, to make this a part of the overall work? It's not on top of or a separate part of the organization that's a standalone thing. This work, and for us in particular, we're really focused on anti-racism work as well. It needs to be a part of everything that we do in the organization. And so that overlay means that we have to reprioritize our work. And so we can't do everything. We have audacious goals. We want to do everything. We want to do it quickly, and we recognize we can't do that. One thing that was an aha for us, we have 5 generations on our staff, and they all come with different learning styles, different communication styles, different experiences. Some people want to move at the speed of light on this, and some people are at a snail's pace, and some people are not interested at all. And so we need that diversity of thought. We need to make sure that we're really approaching it from a harm reduction model, and not harming people in this process, and including all voices. So there are many components that we have to think about, and it takes a long time. It takes, some things are low-hanging fruit and you can jump right in, and some things do take a long time, and some strategic planning around and some investment.
Great, thank you. And Anne, I'd love to hear your take on what are some important factors in thinking about the planning process.
Well, I really support what Ayanna said about, first understanding the scope of what you're trying to do. And just like the Oakland Museum, we've made a commitment to organizational change. And I think, that initial scoping is really important. Are you thinking about this as a project or a policy, or are you thinking about this as the work that you now do? And that's a big commitment. And Ayanna is correct. It takes a long time to get everyone on the same page about that commitment. So, I would say in terms of considerations, we also keep talking about how long it takes, and that's a good point. But really, you just need to start. And I keep encouraging others, just start. And we started with conversations with the board and staff, and I presented to the board about what this could be for us several times, and had to keep that repetition going. And still on the first day of training, I had a board member say, "Oh, I thought this was going to be sexual harassment training." I'm like, no. Did you read my emails? No, but that's all right. And they were appalled that I was going to make them sit there for 4 hours in the first session. I was like, you guys have no idea what's coming next. Like, this is what we do now. And sort of just allowing everyone to take those baby steps together, was important. And we spent, the first year of our strategic plan, we did other things. We did other accomplishments while I was setting the infrastructure. So other considerations, Ayanna mentioned this, like, what are your resources internally, but also externally? We're a very small organization. Right now we have a staff of 10 and a small budget. And so what do we know how to do? What's the skill set with your team and on your board? Who are the champions? Identifying the champions is the great first step, because that's the crew that is going to make this happen. And then what can we not do ourselves? So I started looking around in the community and with professional networks and professional associations, who can help me get these things done? Who knows how to do this? And just cold call them, have meetings, and just say, like, where have you seen this happen before? And try to figure out what's applicable to you. And also, fundraising. I hear that as a big concern. I don't have the money to do this work. It doesn't all the work doesn't take funding, but some of it does. So for us, when we realized what we couldn't do ourselves, and we needed some consultants to come and help us with the training. And it turns out that, one of our regional foundations really wants to support this work, and they hadn't really made that clear, I think, to the community. And so, I applied for this grant and I got it. And the grant officer says, Anne, can you tell me why more organizations aren't applying to do this? We're trying to give this money away. So I keep talking about it now, go to the Santa Barbara Foundation. If you're in my area, they want to pay you to do this kind of training. So, there is some funding out there. And I think it's becoming, especially now after the pandemic, a lot of foundations are going through their own just evolution and revolutions, and they're starting to prioritize this work. And so, that funding, I think, is becoming more visible. And, once you have your funding, you've got your team and your consultants if you need them, and you're having those conversations so everybody understands the real scope. Then we went into training to put everybody on the same page and start speaking the same language. And that took a long time because everybody, the first step was to look inward. The training that we did was very much, very deep about looking inward at yourself and your own implicit bias and sharing your experiences with everyone else. Everyone had to get into sort of a vulnerable space. And when we sort of went through that process, then we could start talking about our audience and our mission and sort of these external factors. But now that we've got those, we know the terms, we know the definitions, we can use language that everyone understands and shares the same meaning of. Then we were really able to start digging in and getting it done.
Thanks for sharing that. I thought your point, Anne, about funding was so interesting that it sort of sounds like a perceived challenge, right? About getting support to do this work. But you were able to secure funding. And Ayanna had also mentioned, talking about reprioritizing resources and making the this kind of substantive support needed for this work available. And I think that's a good segue into another question around the sort of concerns or challenges or struggles that has come up along the way in creating these plans. So I'll leave it to whoever wants to jump in and take that one first.
I can jump in. We've had a lot of struggles. So I will say, the museum has been known for great work over the years, and we've done great work. We have a lot of work to do. And I think this perfect storm that we've been experiencing between COVID, the election, the injustices, particularly of Black and Brown people that frankly have been happening since slavery, but now more people are paying attention through social media and frankly being home with COVID. People are seeing what's happening, has created a reawakening for our staff, our partners, our volunteers, our community. And that has really provided some aha moments for us in, one, recognizing the work that we've done and those who have done the work over the past 51 years, but the deep work that we still have to do. And so our staff have really had an opportunity, and with, I will say with COVID, it created some opportunities as well as some challenges as we've all experienced, but being closed allowed more voices and more people to engage in conversations than ever before. So sometimes people's roles prevented them from participating in some of the discussions where their voices really should have been. And so that was a big aha, and we want to figure out how do we continue that as we plan to reopen in the future. And I will say, if I speak from the I as an HR leader and a person of color who has implemented with my team significant policies, procedures, and trainings towards this work, it really doesn't matter what you put in place. if people don't engage in it, people don't internalize it, because people are coming to organizations with their own history, their own experiences, and particularly in times of stress, they may revert back to those, whether good or bad. And so you can have all the policies, procedures, trainings you want in place, but until people really internalize it and really shift the culture and it becomes a part of the DNA of the culture, it doesn't matter. And in order to do that, they need to be a part of the process of creation. And so that has been a big turning point for us, I think, in this time period of really struggling to figure out, okay, why aren't these things that have been in place really working? Where are those gaps? And what we're realizing, people didn't always internalize it or believe it, or were even frankly aware of it, because they were not a part of the creation of it. And so this has been an aha for our whole organization, and we're really moving towards making that shift so that we can really shift the culture in a new way. So it's been exciting and challenging at the same time. So we're very hopeful, but it's going to take work, and it is very difficult.
Yeah, just connecting what you're saying, bringing it back to what we started with around thinking about inclusivity and staff. And I loved how you pointed out the kind of opportunity that has come with the closure of your institution to the public, and kind of freeing up people's time to be able to think about something else. And again, thinking about investing the resources in paying for people's time, right, to participate in these processes. A great takeaway for this time that we find ourselves in. Anne, what about on your end? What are some of the concerns or challenges that have come up along the way?
Well, like I said, we just finished our plan, and I see the work of implementing that plan as a series of challenges. And I don't have a roadmap for each one yet. I just know that we're going to do it, and I'm committed to that. But I'll pick one sort of challenge that I've grappled with recently in the process of getting our plan made public, and that was a real fearfulness, especially from board members, about sharing our work, because I think some of them, they really got engaged in talking about it internally in board meetings, and were very proud of the work, very proud of the plan. But when it came to sharing it, and when I said we're going to put it on our website, do you have to do that? And yes, for accountability, we need to share it. And this, if it's not on the website and people can't see it, how do we know we're actually doing it? And I think what they were concerned about was, does this make us vulnerable? A lot in our plan, because it's a series of projects that we need to do and accomplishments we need to make. It's an acknowledgement that we haven't done those things, and we're putting that out there to the community. We're going out there and saying, we're acknowledging the road ahead, and we've got a lot of change to make, and we haven't been serving our audience or ourselves as well as we should have been. And doing that takes a lot of bravery. And so, that's how I've sort of chosen to see that kind of fearfulness. I see it as fearfulness instead of resistance, because fearfulness we can overcome with building confidence. And other types of resistance, I don't like this work, or I don't want to do it, or it's on top of my other duties, that kind of thing are harder to overcome. So when I've approached, and it really, I have to acknowledge, it's been at the board level, and most of the board are huge champions, and then we have this sort of fearful component. The 4 other staff members that are on this call are huge champions of this. I mean, they are part of this train moving forward that cannot be stopped at this point. I'm so grateful for that. But thinking about it that way, of people who are there's a fearfulness about being vulnerable, and part of doing this work means you're making yourself vulnerable, and people may, community members may say, that's right, you guys have this statue, I forgot about that, I hate it, what are you going to do about it? And you know, we're ready for that. That's part of why we're releasing the plan. And so I think moving everyone through that stage of, it's great when you talk about it in a board meeting, now we're going to share it with the community. It was a big challenge to work through, but it's vital if you're making you know, an authentic commitment.
That's just, I think, such a relevant point for so many of our institutions, and sort of also just to the discourse that visibility and accountability can also equal vulnerability. And how do you get your broader team to kind of overcome that fear of being vulnerable and that kind of ingrained dare I say fragility, to be able to actually accomplish goals. I think that's a really important point. And Ayanna, you already mentioned a little bit about how COVID has affected the implementation of the creation and implementation of this work, and creating that staff time. And I'd love to hear from both of you, again, a little bit more about how the pandemic in particular has affected the course of this work for you.
Sure. Yeah, in so many ways, again, both positive and challenging. You know, we, through COVID, have discovered some new models that we're considering for shifting leadership and shared leadership models through COVID. For example, we have a safety team that has really led the charge. It's a cross-functional team of people that are leading the charge. It's not the executive team. I will say I am on the safety team as an executive team member, but more on the HR side. But it's really a team that has worked together to make the decisions around safety related to COVID and our reopening or our closing and the policies and procedures. And this is leading the charge for the whole organization. So this model we're finding is working really well. And it's something that we may shift our organization overall towards this type of working model. Also, we were lucky enough to receive some funding from some generous donors, as well as the PPP, which allowed us to retain all of our staff. And I will say, like many organizations, when we first had to close our doors, we went through a variety of scenarios around, do we lay off? Do we furlough? What do we do? Do we retain our staff? And we were just very, very lucky to receive the funding. And we also wanted to lead with an equity model where we chose to keep all of our staff on through the end of this calendar year. And we kept our part-time staff at their budgeted hours, our full-time staff reduced hours. We thought this shared sacrifice was an equity model. What we realized it was, and some inequities were created from that model. Whereas there were some people that were getting full pay that really weren't doing the work that they could have done, or we had to redeploy to other assignments and they had that time to do some self-healing. And then there are others who were on reduced schedules that were working harder than ever. And so that did create some inequities. And so we're grappling with that as well. So even with your best efforts towards equitable work, even in situations like COVID, there are some ramifications. And those are things that we're learning from. So COVID has allowed us to learn in this moment about our organization, and allowed staff to really engage differently with each other and have different types of dialogue with each other about who we are and where we're going as an organization and what our priorities are and our values. So there's been pros and cons to COVID. So we take the good with the bad.
Always a learning, ongoing process for sure. Anne, how about you?
Well, I'm seeing some comments in the chat about the shared leadership model, and I think that's one of the very cool things that the Oakland Museum is exploring. So I hope Ayanna will, I want to learn more about that too. So I hope we can share more about that. The pandemic for us, it accelerated our change. And, very early on, a colleague shared with me Arundhati Roy's essay, "The Pandemic is a Portal." And, that idea of we're all going through the portal and we can choose what to leave behind from the old times and what we want to bring with us that is still meaningful. And I've tried to look at all of our work through that lens of, what do we want to leave behind? And I think, for example, with our DEI work, we have a lot of programs that we've been, we have a few key programs that are very robust, that use a lot of resources, that we've been doing the same way for 25 years because they're popular and because we do them. And so, we're probably going to be closed for over a year, probably 16 months. We closed in March. I don't foresee us opening, till spring or summer next year. That gives us a real opportunity to push the reset button on some of those programs. And, a main genre of these are our living history programs with, costumed interpreters and certain representations of the past at our site. And it's in our plan, our DEI plan, that we're going to do a full assessment of those programs. And what better time to do it than, when we're closed? We can reinvent now what those look like, and have just taken that year to say, this is time for real thinking and change. So, and I think that the pandemic, as an executive director, and I do have, a side point to make, where I think this work needs to be embraced by the upper leadership. If it's not, if it's given to staff and put in a side committee, it's hard for me to imagine, how this could really happen. So, part of the result of the pandemic was that I wasn't running around to meetings all over town all day long. I had more, in some ways, more thinking time, more strategic thinking time. And that accelerated, the change in my mind. I was able to, have those conversations with board members, reach out to consultants, have deep meetings with the team, and say, this is the time to think about what we really want to be, not just keep doing what we've been doing because we know how to do it. And so, in a way, it's been a real blessing. And I think for my generation, that's something that we started to learn the first time during the recession, in 2008, 2009. That was also a reset point, and it propelled us, our change in our field in a way. And this is doing it again. And, we all have an opportunity to take advantage of that momentum. There's my optimistic way of having experienced this. There are some dark times too, you guys.
Well, optimism is a great way to transition to our last kind of prepared question, I think, which is, it's, believe it or not, December and end of 2020. And as we kind of look forward in the new year and the time ahead, what is your overall outlook on the future of DEAI efforts at your institutions? And maybe let's start with the Oakland Museum this time.
Boy, that's a big question. Well, I think the future is bright. Like I said, we've been doing some of this work for a long time. We are pivoting more towards not just the DAI work, or however you like to use the letters, but more towards anti-racism work and really decentralizing power, eliminating the sense of urgency, which is a part of anti-racism work, and really slowing down to focus on what is important internally, what is important to our community, what is in alignment with our mission, what are our values. We are reassessing potentially our values to make sure that this work is a part of those set of values, and that we're all in alignment, moving the train in the same direction, and that it's sustainable. Because as we know, you could do a lot of work, and as people come in and out of your organization, it's starting all over. And so we're trying to identify ways to make this work sustainable for the long term. It becomes a part of our DNA, and it evolves as people evolve, as the community evolves, as the world evolves. We're a global community, so it has to be able to continue to evolve. So that's why I said at the beginning, it's work that never ends. So, you know, we could have a plan now, and that plan's going to evolve. And so it's important to just keep moving and making sure that people are not left out. And so that's where I think is a big pivot for us, making sure that the people are not left out, the voices are heard, and that people have accountability and visibility in this work. And so we're excited and hopeful for the future.
Great. I love hearing hopefulness in this time for sure. And Anne, in addition to kind of hitting the reset button on programs like you talked about, what is your outlook for your institution?
Oh, I feel like, you know, launching this plan was just as important, if not more important, than completing our strategic plan. And this is going to propel us forward. And like Ayanna said, it's about creating a sustainable model for your organization. And I think it's important to call out too that creating a sustainable model when you're doing DEI is not just about making these slight little tweaks or putting up an exhibit or having a one-off program, and then the sort of machine of you absorbs, you know, all of this ideas and then churns back out what you've always been doing. We're all part of an embedded system of funders and media and other partners that like us to perpetuate what we've always been doing. There's a lot of forces at play getting us to keep on the same track. And so creating a sustainable model means really allowing that change to happen. So for me, what the next year looks like is, you know, I know because we just finished our board recruitment that the demographics of our board are going to be significantly different by, you know, at least 20% of the board. And that's huge for us. And I'm proud of that. When we do hiring, our staff is going to start looking different. They're going to hopefully have more language abilities, and they're going to come from other different backgrounds that reflect the community. And so, and I don't know what all of this change is exactly going to make us look like in the future. It's going to be really different, and I'm so excited about it. That's the potential here, and you know, just make sure that everybody keeps their eyes on that goal. That this is about transformative change, and what an exciting time for our field if we really grasp that potential for museums to be of service. You know, part of this is about better doing the work that we're meant to be doing. Like that's what DEI is supposed to get you to. It's not, you know, a side project. It's about doing the work of our mission. And so, gosh, what do we look like when we've fully embraced all of that change? I can't wait to see it.
Beautiful. So with our last 13-ish minutes, it looks like, I definitely want to make sure we get to some Q&A. And we did have one question come in during the registration process that I think we'll start with, and then I'll turn it over to Kevin to read out the next questions. So this question that came in during the registration process was, as the chair of my institution's staff DEI committee, what are the options to us to candidly learn and share from other cultural orgs' DEI efforts? So maybe in addition to this panel, what are some of the other opportunities, Ayanna and Anne, that you've experienced to learn from other institutions' work?
Reaching out and doing informational interviews, just connecting with people, asking for some time to talk about what you're doing, what you're interested in, asking them to connect you with others. If there are groups that are doing this work based on your function. So for example, we have a local HR group that meets monthly of the local cultural arts and funding institutions. Also national, where we have a national HR group. And depending upon your function, you can have that cohort of people that you're working with to gather information, as well as attending, of course, it's many of these wonderful programs that are available, but really just connecting with people.
Yeah, I would say I think about it in tiers also. There's sort of the national networks, and so I had mentioned before AASLH I think is doing a great job for those who are in history museums. International Coalition of Sites of Conscience has some wonderful resources. They're easy to talk to. I mean, they're international, and yet you can find a person who will take your call. And then also locally, I know that, we're in a privileged position at my organization. We're not in danger of failing as an institution due to the pandemic. As I know, a lot of my colleagues cannot pick their heads up from their budget spreadsheets right now to be thinking about this. But some of them are figuring it out anyway. So, who is it locally? Like I'm part of a county museum directors roundtable. I know several of my colleagues are on the call today. Can you talk about it with that kind of peer group? Also in Santa Barbara County, we have an annual conference called the Partnership for Excellence, and we're doing a session on DEI next week. And so it's for, broadly for nonprofits. And one of the results we hope that will happen from this next week is that we'll build cohorts, and that, how much can you do in a webinar for 1 hour? Like for me, it's getting to see all of you out there and learning about what you're interested in and what questions you have, but how do you continue it? So, I hope that you'll reach out to me or reach out to Ayanna. She's like super cool and, great contact for you. And maybe she doesn't have time to talk to you. I just volunteered her, but, but please reach out to us. Like, that's why we're doing this. And that's what I hope will come out of some of these opportunities to speak about our work is let's start building those networks. That's another challenge that I have found is, doing a lot of reinventing the wheel, a lot of groundwork that seemed like it should have been faster. So, one outcome from our process was that we put on our website, and I think Lacey or Kevin shared the link. We put our plan up there, but we also put a resource list up there for history museums and preservation groups. And it includes things to read and free tools, but also a lot of organizations nationally that are out there doing this work that want to connect so that it can give everybody a head start. So, you didn't have to do all that research yourself if it's helpful. So please check out that page too. And just, let's just try to continue the conversation with us.
Hear, hear. I certainly hope that this convening is the start of some conversations for all of the people participating in their own institutions. I know I'm coming away with some ideas and questions to follow up on. And so with our remaining time, I did see some questions come in through the chat. So I'm going to turn it over to Kevin to go ahead and read those out. Kevin?
Good afternoon, everyone. Am I on the, there I am. Thanks, Kalie. Great job. So we had a couple questions that people had when they registered. So I think a couple of them were addressed just naturally in the dialogue, but one of the questions is, how do you extend your DEAI policies to vendors and contractors? Pretty interesting question, I thought. So whoever would like to take that first.
That's a great question. Yeah. One of the things that we always say, our visitors don't know the difference between our contractors and our staff and our volunteers. So it's really important that everybody be on the same page. With that said, when your contractors are either independent or they're employed by different organizations, there are policies and rules and laws that prevent you from doing some of the trainings or sharing some of the information or including them in some of the discussions. So it's really important in our contracts. We actually have specific diversity and inclusion language and expectations that we put in our contracts. We are now in the process of really reevaluating our vendors and who our vendors are. And our partners, for example, we have great partnership with our security team, which is an outside contractor, and we work with them on making sure that they are included in some of the changes and that their voice is heard and that they participate in some of the learnings that all of our staff and volunteers will also participate in, because people really don't know the difference. And so we want to have one unified voice. So it's really important that you look at who you're working with and what they're signing. So really take a look at the language in your contracts and make sure that they can agree with the direction you're going as an institution.
Thank you. Anne, do you have anything to add?
I think Ayanna has nailed it. And I think the Oakland Museum has made some good strides in that direction. I was just going to suggest as a resource, internally, this group had talked about the Cultural Competence Learning Institute study on DEI in museums. The results just came out in September, and maybe Kevin can throw that up in the chat. But there's a whole section on your relationship with vendors and how that intersects with your DEI work. And it sort of presents a state of the field and then some suggestions and recommendations about what you can do within your own institution. So that's a good place to go to.
To find that link, or maybe Lacey can find it, and, or Kalie, and put it in the chat. Okay, another question, and I think maybe I'll refer to Ayanna, since you mentioned the Oakland Museum's commitment to anti-racism. This was a question from registration as well. Have you addressed moral and mental health issues that come up from the different ways the protests and killings of the recent protests and the killings of Black Americans have impacted your staff?
Yeah, we emphasize a lot of mental health resources, not just from the protest, but just everything that's going on. I mean, that's a major factor, but we're really lucky to have a robust employee assistance program with extended benefits around mental health. And so we emphasize that constantly. We have a wonderful staff that engage in wellness activities every week for us through our learning and development program, whether it's meditation and stretching or journaling. We also, have dialogue and conversation with staff and create space for them to heal. We've provided additional time off for people to heal and take that time that they need and really encourage it. It's hard for people, even in a virtual world when you're closed, to actually take time off, which we found people don't want to do that. And so we're really encouraging people to really take the time that they need to address some of these things. We also have had some affinity groups that have sprung up to create some healing circles, and are supporting those affinity groups in their need to work together and process some of what's happening for specific groups. And so that's been really lovely to see and to be able to support. So, this is ongoing. This is not new, and particularly for people of color, this is not new. This has been going on. And so grappling with people facing that reality, and there's kind of a different level of processing there. And for people where this is new and this is a shock, there is a process that they are grappling with. So we're trying to support all through this challenge at this time, and really encouraging mental health and trying to eliminate stigma around mental health.
Thank you, Ayanna. And if you want to add anything, as an employee that works under Anne, I know that she's been very, very, open to allowing her staff to be open and express how they feel during all this. And I've even gotten to, take time to protest myself. So, Anne, I don't know if you have anything, any other things you'd like to add to how this has impacted your staff and the morale around the protests.
Gosh, oh my gosh, here I'm speaking with you guys all sort of in the audience here. But I'd say, totally learning from what Ayanna is doing at the Oakland Museum. I think because we're a small team, we have 10 staff right now, that I've been able to do a lot of good one-on-one conversations to figure out where everybody's at. And I think another silver lining of the pandemic was having more informal methods of communication. We can't wander into each other's offices, but we use Slack, and Slack has taken on a whole different culture of communication than email or phone calls. And that's, for me, where a lot of the sort of check-ins, like, how are you doing today? Do you need to take some time? Where are you at? how are you feeling? It happens in Slack, and it's become a great tool just for a quick informal check-in. Just make sure that everybody's doing okay. And I've created some space in our staff meetings for those kinds of conversations. They don't really. I've heard that people appreciate it, but they don't really take off in sort of the bigger group. So for us, just having a space for those one-on-ones has been real helpful.
Thank you all, and we are coming up right on the end of our time. So huge thank you to our panelists for taking the time today to share so openly. And thank you to all of the participants as well for your great questions, your engagement in the chat. I think we just have some brief closing remarks on the CAM side. So Tomoko, can you take it away?
Perfect. Thanks so much, Kalie. And thank you, Ayanna. Thank you, Anne. Kalie did a great job. Kevin, thank you so much. And, this was a really, really important discussion. There's so many wonderful takeaways. I'm really excited to dig into some of the information that you guys shared, and certainly have a lot of questions that I'm going to be following up with. Thanks everyone for tuning in. You will be receiving a link to a program evaluation in your email. Please share your feedback. We need to, know how you are responding to these, to the series, and then next week, same time, we will be having our second to last ReMuseum event, and it's a focus on marketing. So we really want you to, tune into that one. There's also going to be some great information shared. So again, thank you so much, and look forward to seeing you next week.